Welcome to That Entrepreneur Life, a podcast about entrepreneurship that takes you from idea to launch and beyond. Each week, your hosts, Andrew Lees and Clint McPherson, discuss different business topics aimed at adding value to any entrepreneur's journey.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of That Entrepreneur Life. I'm Andrew Lees, and I'm here with my co-host, Clint McPherson. What's up, man? How you doing?
I'm doing good, brother. But like always, when we kick the week off or when we close the week out like it is on a Friday, man, I'm excited to just get in here and do the damn thing. And I want to welcome our special guest today, Kam Snow, to the show. How you doing, brother?
Doing good. How are you guys?
Great, man. Yeah, we're very excited to have you on the show here. Before we get into everything, we've got a few questions for you. We want to dig into your background and entrepreneurial journey. Before we do, can you just give us a quick overview of who you are and what you're all about?
Yeah, for sure. So my name's Kam, and together with my wife, Carla, we run the Story Economy, which is a coaching business, and we help other coaches, consultants, and strategists tell their stories more effectively using the Story Economy, which is the 7 core stories that you need to book out your programs. And my background is in copywriting. I was a professional copywriter for 4 years, and I, in that time, generated and helped drive over $10 million in revenue. And in 2019, went out on my own, and now we do the Story Economy, helping entrepreneurs tell their stories.
Very cool. Love it.
That's very dope, brother. With you saying that, Kam, as a former political consultant, which we kind of talked about a little bit offline just a second ago, and now owner over your own copywriting firm, man, take us back to when your entrepreneurial journey actually started and what it is about entrepreneurship, brother, that led you to where you are today.
Man, that's a great question. I mean, if I'm going to go all the way back, I would say like my first entrepreneurial experience is, when I was a kid selling candy bars, and like I was homeschooled, so I didn't really have a lot of interaction with the other kids, and so I wasn't in a lot of sports or anything like that. At least until I went to private school in junior high. And so my mom literally just, whenever there was a sale at Walgreens for candy bars, we would go and buy these like packages of candy bars. And we would just, instead of going up to the doors and be like, hey, we're doing a fundraiser for our soccer team, it was just like, hey, we're just getting experience to be good businessmen, me and my brother. And like, it works. And so we did that awesome. For like a solid summer, honestly, probably a couple of years of just selling candy bars, just because, of course, as we got older and like the cuteness factor began to wear off, like the pitch got a little bit harder. So we recruited a younger friend who was, more attracted to the old ladies. And that worked out pretty well. So that was probably like the first seeds of entrepreneurship. And then, for myself, like you mentioned, that I was in politics for 6 years, from 2009, end of 2009 to like the beginning of 2016. And that whole era, I mean, it had always been kind of like this very deeply buried dream of like, oh yeah, I want to run my own thing someday. But it was always a far off, distant, someday kind of thing. Never thought about how that would actually happen. And then in 2016, I got on with Scott Oldford. There's a whole story there I can go into if you want. And in 2019, after 3 years of writing for Scott, I went out on my own just by it was just a God thing at the end of the day. It was just Scott decided to do something else with his team and his vision for what he wanted to do. And it was time for me to go out on my own, basically. Like that was the open door. And so I walked through it and, have been in free fall ever since, building my plane and my parachute on the way down, as you do. So yeah, so I did the freelance copywriting thing and writing for people for probably 16 months. And then recently, in August, September of last year, stopped doing the freelancing. And now we just coach people on their content and helping them break through and tell their stories.
Okay. That's very cool. So you kind of switched over from doing writing, from doing the freelance writing to actually coaching people on letting them write, but you coach them, kind of guide them through the process.
Because at the end of the day, like when you go out and hire a copywriter, there's really like 2 directions you can go. You can hire someone to just like write the words, which can be very affordable. Or you can hire someone who was more like what I did, where you're more of a marketing strategist who writes. And that's going to command a premium price, which is great if you're a freelance, if you're a copywriter. That's absolutely the direction you want to go, is you want to be a strategist writer versus just, kind of like grinding out words. But the reality is, as an entrepreneur, what we figured out is that if we can help an entrepreneur figure out what to say in their messaging, and even down to the details of like, here's how you start this post or this email, and here's how you start the sales page, and you can just take the bulk of that and hand it off to a copywriter with some templates and stuff, you can save a lot of money and make it more efficient, more streamlined. So that's kind of the big vision around the story economy in terms of like the content creation is like, hey, let's help the entrepreneurs pull out those stories, because you can't have a copywriter do that for you. A copywriter can't just tell your story for you if you don't know what it is.
Oh, so definitely.
That's really like the impetus of it at this point.
Yeah, exactly. And that's interesting because one of my businesses, we sell bamboo display racks for storage racks for boards, bikes, and skis. And I talk with my business partner all the time about, hey, we need to have some content, but it would be great to be able to outsource it. But two things is it can be expensive unless you're just paying somebody to grind out words, and just grinding out words isn't going to get our story across, because we know that the best, right? So
yeah.
And I think good copywriting is something that's underrated in marketing today. There's all kinds of stuff about pay per click, and that's great, and that requires copywriting in of itself. But really, I think it's underrated, especially when it comes to building organic awareness online.
Totally.
Can you explain what your 7 stories strategy is, and how does that help businesses connect with their ideal audience?
Yeah. For sure. So the story economy came about last August. And I was just at a point where there were a number of factors, both personal and professional, that kind of led me to this point. And a big one was knowing that I could help people at a higher level, but I didn't have a vehicle to do it. And then as a copywriter, there were so many times where I would sit down and just do story extraction with someone and pull out all these amazing stories that they had about entrepreneurship and life. And I just didn't know what to do with it. And I would be able to use like 10% or less of these stories. And so the story economy came about as a way to fully utilize all the stories of an entrepreneur in their marketing to drive the quality leads that you're looking for, the people who are really the best fit for you. So the 7 stories kind of have it outlaid like a pyramid. And that first story, kind of like a skyscraper, like you got to build your foundation first before you can build the second story. And so that first story is your personal why story. It's why did you start the business, or why specifically when we're selling an offer, which is what the story economy is all about. It's like, okay, what is the offer that you're selling? Like the bamboo racks for your bikes. And that first story is, okay, well, why? Like, why did you create this? Right. And there are multiple reasons, but oftentimes when I'm working with a strategist, like it can go pretty deep on like, why did you create this, business program to help people get leads? Or why did you create this coaching program to help women express confidence? Right. And there's always a deeper reason there. So we start there, always start with the why, and extracting that story forms the foundation for getting to the next story, which is the authority story. That authority story is answering the question of like, that first story is kind of like, why do you care about this avatar and this problem that you're solving? Yeah. And the authority story is like, okay, well, why are you qualified to solve this problem? How do I know that you can actually solve this problem for me? And it's collecting all the evidence of why the thing works. Then that third story is the standout story, also known as the positioning story, of like, okay, well, cool. I know that you care. I know that you have some proof for why you can fix the problem, but what makes you different? Like you were talking, Andrew, about the bamboo thing. And obviously it's like, well, what's different? Well, it's made of bamboo. That's one thing that we can hone in on why it's different. And there's a whole story around the bamboo. Right. So that's, when you're working with coaches, consultant strategists, this is just a big one. And oftentimes I find that we can figure out that positioning and this in the standout part from doing the first two and kind of extracting a lot of the gold and being like, oh, there's this thing that you didn't even realize was really significant. That's actually really significant. A good example is my very first business mentor that I worked with has like just a ton of experience in selling high ticket stuff to the tune of like he would fly around the world working with big companies like JP Morgan or I forget, there are a couple just huge banks that he would work with, and he would put together consulting packages that they would position and sell for like $9 million to other big banks, right? And so when we did a story extraction, I'm pulling out these things. I'm like, why did you talk about this? This is the coolest thing I've ever read in the online space. It's like, I don't know. Whatever. It's just, it was just my life, right?
What he does normally. Yeah. And people have to realize that what seems boring as hell to them is exciting to somebody else. I heard Gary Vee recently, somebody was, this woman was asking him, how she I don't know, she was going to start a vlog, and she was asking, she was like, I don't have anything interesting to talk about. And he's like, you do, like, what's interesting, like something that is not interesting to you is interesting to somebody else. He's like, I'm interested in where you got that sweatshirt. That's interesting to me. That's not interesting to you. You already have a sweatshirt, but So sorry to cut you off there, but that's a really
I'm
cool
interested
point.
in where Clint got his hat, right? Like he's got the branding on point.
Yeah, that entrepreneurlife.com.
Good quick plug there. So that's kind of the third story. And those three stories, like when I walk someone through that process of getting those out, I actually just did a training in my Facebook group on like how to pull out 30 stories just around those three core assets. And the whole idea is we're taking these kind of story categories and we're pulling out everything that's there, because you run your entire marketing off of your story, which is kind of the idea. So then that fourth story that comes in the middle is the promotional story. And this is just like, okay, we've got some ideas, we've got some hooks, we've got some angles, some topics of interest. Now, what are we promoting, right? And how are we going to put that in the world to bring somebody into your training or kind of tease what's coming? A promotional story is just very much like it's any story that you're out there telling that is designed to promote something. Yeah. And typically, I categorize this as like you're talking about a pain point, or you're talking about a consequence of inaction. And oftentimes maybe it's a unique mechanism, and you're positioning it to promote like your webinar or your challenge or something that's not necessarily a sales action yet, because the next story is the offer story. And the offer story is like, hey, here's story behind the offer, or it's a client story. These two categories, promotional and offer, like there's a ton of different directions to go with it. And it kind of just depends on the entrepreneur on, what kind of story we tell. So I just posted an offer story in my group today, and it's totally different from the one I posted a month ago. It's just different timing, different story. So that is the offer story is the fifth story. And then 6 and 7 are a little more self-explanatory. That sixth story is called the objection story. And if you're reading a sales page, oftentimes you'll get to that FAQ section, the frequently asked questions. Right. That's one way that I teach my clients to do an objection story is like, what are all the objections that are left? Because in reality, every story is an objection story, because we're shifting a belief, and a belief is an objection. And so we're just kind of trying to cover like, okay, we've put the offer in front of them. Now, what are they going to say for why they can't do it? And how are we going to counter that? And are there stories that we can tell? Specifically client stories, testimonials, and things like that are great for objection stories.
Yeah, I think that's a really powerful way to poke holes in your idea, to poke holes in your product, your service, and make it a lot stronger. Because if you can easily get around, especially the more information that you put on your website, the less people are going to ask you, so the less they're going to bother you. Not that you're there to serve, right? So not that you mind being bothered, but at some point it becomes, you've got to get that
you want to handle that
there
before the sales conversation.
Yeah. It's much more efficient.
Right. So that last story is the invitation story. And the invitation story it's one of my personal favorites, because I kind of imagine this as like kind of a sit down at a coffee shop and kind of like a come to Jesus moment, where it's like, hey, I know that this offer, this works especially well for higher ticket, right? Or if you're selling like $1,000 course and your audience is like, man, that's a stretch. Like, it's like you're sitting down and it's like, hey, look, I remember being in your shoes. I remember where I was looking at something, at an outcome that I wanted in my life, and the pathway to getting there was scary and uncertain. And I didn't know how I was going to get there, but I made a leap of faith to invest in this thing or take this action or do this thing. And I didn't necessarily know how it was going to work out, but I bet on myself and I did it. And that's my version of the invitation story. And it can also be a missed opportunity story. I posted this one in my Facebook group. When we moved into this house, we went to Lowe's and I was tasked by my wife with getting a washer. And she had a very specific washer that she wanted. And I was supposed to just go and see if they had it in store. And we get there and I find it in the store. It was in the refurbished section and it was marked down like 90%. It was $1,200 washer and it was marked for $300. I was like, awesome. Yeah, this is it. Well, long story short, like they wouldn't let me take it that day because of some paperwork. And I was like, okay, I'll come back, drop the ball. Somebody else got the washer and I missed out on it. And I was able to like talk to Lowe's and convince them to give it to me for $700 instead of $300. But the point is I used that as a story of like, hey, I had an amazing opportunity.
Yeah.
And then I missed it because I didn't take action. And I've had people since then who've become clients who are like, man, I remember that story.
Yeah.
Because it was kind of embarrassing, right? Like, man, this is so stupid. Like, especially, my wife was not happy about it at the time. But now
I could imagine. I could imagine that she wasn't at all. But when you look at it, man, it seems like, again, that it's all about telling the story, telling it properly and making sure that it entices action, right? Because at the end of the day, you're selling that product, you're selling a service, and you want whoever is on the other side that you're speaking to, your avatar, to take that action immediately, not later on down the road. You really want to convince them and actually build a good enough rapport with them that you make a connection, that you're almost instantly validated and trusted right off the bat, right? Because you're telling them a story that they can like relate to. And now it's like, all right, now pull the trigger because I basically laid it out for you. You can trust me. Product's great. What are you waiting for? Right? Like, why are you still watching this video? Whatever it is.
Exactly.
Like, why are you still watching this webinar? And I've been talking on it for an hour. Go ahead and get the product now, test it out, whatever it is, man.
Why are you still listening to this podcast? I haven't bought your hat
exactly. Go take action, man. Go ahead and tell your 7-story strategy, which I love, man. And thank you for like laying that out for us, bro. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, that's at the end of the day, like in 2021, and this has been true forever, but it's a nice marketing hook to say in 2021, like trust is what matters. And I do think that it is more relevant now because there's been an explosion in the coaching and online industry with COVID, people coming online. And there's more voices, right? And building trust is so critical to actually like having good, profitable and productive client relationships. Yeah. And there's just too many gurus out there, to use the buzzword, who have kind of they just hawk their products, right? And there's not really much of a connection. And it's just so much better for you and your clients when there is a trusted relationship of, hey, I've been in your shoes and I get it, and I'm gonna be invested in your success.
Yeah, it's a long-term. It's a strategy for long-term growth. You'd rather have 1,000 really truly connected, passionate customers or, followers than 10,000, right? Because it really is. And that's like, it doesn't seem, everybody's like, I want more likes, I want more followers, I want, more. But really the quality of it is what drives your sustainable long-term growth, and even short-term growth. But man, if you want to stick around and be in business for a long time, if you're building that connection, you're building, a marketing engine, because people who connect with you, people who remember you are going to then tell that story, tell your story to other people. I mean, we're marketing for other people's products all the time, and other people are cashing in all the time, but
you're just tapping into that that connection piece. Like one of my friends, Spencer, I worked with him last year on like my workflow and productivity, because I had a very disorganized brain. Like I was just a mess and I had a hard time focusing on anything. And I went through his program and just like fixed the problem. And I was like, I didn't know that this could be fixed. This is crazy. Like I've been dealing with this like chaotic energy in my mind for, 27 years and kind of like fixed it. And so since then, man, I've been like an evangelist of that, of that program. And like, I'm talking about it right now on this podcast. And I've referred like almost $100,000 in business to him last year, just because I was like, you need this. You have a problem. Here's the solution. Go get it.
Yeah.
Like when you can tap into that, and you've got the trust, and none of that would work if I didn't trust him.
Right.
If I didn't have that connection to him. So that is really what we're trying to tap into, is just like showing up, being authentic, all those good, juicy buzzwords that are actually quite true, and driving good business to the people who deserve it.
Absolutely.
Couldn't agree more, man. I mean, it's so Cam, as business owners, right, and marketers ourselves, we all end up having to write a lot of content to try to write that next piece of content that we might not want to write, but like, man, for us to stay relevant or for us to produce content, we have to do something, right? But at times that could be incredibly difficult for us, and to be consistent at, right? Especially with that thing called writer's block, among other things, all the distractions that get in your way. But what advice would you give to, business owners or individuals that are actually doing the writing, whether it's the copywriter or the business owner who's suffering from writer's block, and how do they get unstuck from that, man?
Oh man, it's so good. It's my favorite topic. There's a number of different things. So we're just going to start with like the block, right? The writer's block can come from some very tangible, easily fixable things, such as, and I would separate this into different realms. There's the entrepreneur and their personal habits to create enough energy, enough time, enough sleep, like all of that stuff. Like if you are not feeling good and you're trying to create and produce something, generally speaking, it's not very good. Like yesterday, I'd had a long work day and I was like, oh man, I got to write a piece of content. I wrote it like the end of my work day. I had brain fog like crazy. And like, I was just like, you know what, this is not even close to my best work. Like I know I could do better, but I'm just going to post it. All right. So if I want to create my best content, I need to know my natural kind of rhythm. And for me, it tends to be like morning-ish, maybe not immediately. I'm experimenting right now if it's like first thing in the morning or if it's like kind of a mid-morning thing for me. But finding when your golden hours are for being creative. That's really important. Just on the personal side, knowing when you're at your best. On kind of the business and content side, we often make things harder for ourselves than they need. And so if your way of creating content is you've got an hour or 2 hours in the morning, you're like, all right, on your calendar, it says write content. You've already set yourself up for failure, because there's more than one part to creating content. Like, first of all, there's the foundation. Who are you writing to? And what is the intention? What is the outcome of you writing? Like those two things have to be locked in. If you walk into your content writing block and you're still not really clear on who you're writing to, you've already like set yourself up for a little bit of failure there, because it's like, who am I talking to?
Like, what am I doing?
And if you don't have a clear outcome for why you're writing, if you're just like, well, I just have to post to post. I just got to be in the newsfeed. Like, that's not a very strong motivation for you to keep going, first of all. And second of all, like, what is the actual business goal that you're trying to hit? Like visibility. Okay, cool. Yeah. What's the value? Like there's something to be said for visibility, but that visibility is like in order to do something. Like I want to be visible so that I can ask somebody to take action, like download a lead magnet or buy the thing. So knowing your outcome, knowing who you're writing to, and then that other big area, what am I writing about? So I recommend, and we spend a lot of time on this in our programs, is separating figuring out what you're going to write about from the actual writing. And there's a whole bunch of different ways that people get content ideas, but having a separate block of like, okay, I'm going to write about this. And for me, I'll just write out some like opening lines of like, that's how I kind of figure out my topics. And to that end, having a really simple system, and this is where Spencer's workflow system comes in, because I have one spot where I put all my ideas. And if I'm just walking around or I'm driving, I get a ton of ideas when I'm driving. I just like pull out my phone and just put it into my content queue of like, ooh, I just thought of this thing. And so I'm capturing these things all the time. So that when I do go to write, I'm not starting with a blank slate. I already have a
list of.
Yeah. And then another great thing that I don't do a ton of this right now, but thinking I might, which is using templates. Templates can oftentimes what I'll do, one little kind of writer's hack that I'll do is if I'm feeling stuck and I'm staring at the blank page and I'm just like, I don't know what to write about. Sometimes what I'll do is I will take a piece of content that I've already written and I'll put it on that blank page so that there's text already on the screen.
Yeah.
And then I'll like, oh, I'm just going to edit this. And then I start to edit. And I'm like, actually, no, this is something completely different. And then I just start and I write something completely new. But by putting words onto the screen, you're tricking your brain into thinking that you actually already have momentum.
Yeah, I think that's very helpful, right? It's just getting started and getting that momentum, feeling like you've already accomplished something.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Definitely.
And you're just kind of, if you're having trouble getting started, that's a really simple trick to kind of get some momentum and start writing something. Another thing is just start writing. Like there are times where I look at the page, I'm like, I have no idea what to write. I don't feel good. I don't want to talk today.
Yeah.
And I'll just write what's in my head and be like, I don't feel good. I want to do something else, blah, blah, blah. And then as I get into that, then I can start accent. Sometimes I take like 10 minutes to just free write, dump what's inside out onto the page, and then I can get into it.
That's so what it kind of unblocks. Yeah. I love that. Kind of unblocks whatever's in your head that's kind of in the way of the content that you really need to write and helps you to focus. Yeah, that's awesome.
And all of that stuff, that's some really practical stuff. There's another category of writer's block, which goes a lot deeper. And that's like, sometimes you go to write something and this comes up all the time with storytelling and the story economy. It's like, cool, I need you to share a story about a time where you were afraid, right? It's like, I don't want to do that.
Right.
And there's like a more intense, like physical reaction in your body when at the thought of being vulnerable to a large audience. And that's typically connected to some kind of trauma, honestly.
Yeah.
And like a lot of what we do in this story economy process and the story launch accelerator is just kind of like finding those things that like physiologically are blocking and be like, cool, let's just unwire that, find the thing, and let's just get that out of the way. And now you can write your thing because you're like, oh, the reason I'm so afraid to talk about this specific thing is because like my body thinks that I'm in the same danger that I was in when that story actually happened.
Yeah.
And that's a super serious thing that can keep you really blocked. And oftentimes you don't even know that it's there until you go through the process of like, all right, I'm going to tell my stories. And then you face all kinds of stuff, which is a lot of what we do is just creating an environment where it's safe to talk about that stuff. Yeah.
Where you can feel comfortable getting through something and like really accessing your brain in it as much as possible. Right. So yeah, that's really interesting.
For me, like, I don't tell this story as much anymore, but I've got a pretty intense story about like the car accident that we were in and just the fallout in our marriage and our lives. And for a while there, like going to write that story about the car accident, like it was very triggering to just even think about all that because I hadn't processed through it.
Right.
And that's also kind of a principle about sharing stories is you want to share about, the scars, not the open wounds, because stories and content is very powerful stuff. Yeah. And like you are communicating emotions and feelings through your words. And if you don't have a lock and have an awareness of what you're sharing, you can really overwhelm people.
For sure.
And you want to harness that in a powerful way for their good. But it's just one of those things where you want to be wise and discerning in what you share.
And not only overwhelming for people listening to you, but it could be overwhelming for yourself. Like you said, if you still have an open wound and you dive into that, bro, who knows where it's going to take you. But if you go ahead and focus on telling that story again, where that wound's healed and it's scarred over to where it's like, you can dive into that and you can go as deep as you want. And as you allow yourself to go, because again, that wound's healed. It's not going to really trigger something like you said with the open wound, to where it's like, now it's like, bro, what just happened? Like, do you need another therapy session or whatever? Right. Like people were like, oh man, this is good stuff, but it might be, now it's so overwhelming for all of us in this room. Like we didn't even get anything accomplished, but man, no, I love that you brought that up. And I really think that is a good way to focus your energy on. And really, we all have stories, man. We've all been scarred by something in life. We've all been exposed to some kind of trauma that actually, if you sit there and think about it, you're like, dude, that is actually a good story. But we don't even think that because we were in it, right? Or because it was us that it happened to, that it's like, I have a story, but like, nobody's going to think that's interesting. But no, dude, if you tell the story, create it, talk about it, people will be drawn to that.
Yeah. It's not just personal stuff. Like the personal stuff is very powerful, but there's a lot of the story economy is like, it's, you're weaving in between personal and professional because you're one human, but there's a lot of business trauma that happens. Like one of the stories that I would tell all the time when I was working with Scott is our big story for a long time was how he went like $750,000 into debt, and like coming out of that, kind of the rags to riches kind of story, the comeback story. And like, it takes a little bit of awareness and healing to even be able to say, I went $726,000 in debt. Because that's not an easy story to share. And there's a lot of trauma that happens with that. Like Scott would tell the story of like how he would get triggered from somebody knocking on the door because he had creditors coming after him. And like just the physiological effects that doing business, because entrepreneurship is tough, right?
Sure.
And it knocks you around and it leaves a mark. And those scars can be used to help other people. But you got to face them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, and everybody likes a rags to riches story.
Yeah.
We love underdogs, we love people who are comeback, it's not really as interesting when you see somebody who's super successful and, you might be interested in watching their Cribs episode, but you're like, it's not as exciting unless you know that, man, they had to come over a ton of adversity to get to that point, So I think, and some people might, kind of shy away from that because they don't want people to think that they ever weren't this like, powerful, successful person. But I think it's important to be vulnerable and to say, no, it wasn't always like this. And especially if you're coaching, especially if you're coaching people how to be better, that, 100%. Being able to see that you had to go through that too. That's totally huge.
Yeah. Yeah. Have you guys seen the Last Dance on Netflix?
No.
It's
with Jordan.
Yeah, Michael Jordan. It's like 10 episodes. I'm on like episode 3 or something.
Yeah, it's awesome.
But what I like about it kind of going along with this conversation, is that the way that the story is set up in that kind of first episode is almost casts him and the team as an underdog, even though they were on top. They're like, they just won 5 NBA championships. They're looking at 6, and it just builds up like they had so much success that it was almost like everyone else's scarcity of like, it's not possible for you to do it a 6th time.
Right.
It was like overwhelming them. And like, just the pressure on the team was just so high. And it's almost like that, I feel like, is just a great story for entrepreneurs who have been doing well. Right. And like, there's so many quote unquote successful entrepreneurs who feel the pressure to such an extent that it's almost like you create your own underdog.
Yeah.
And and I just love the stories of there's always a story. There's always a story of overcoming. Another great example is one of my favorite musicians is NF. He's a Christian rapper dude. I don't know if it's fair to say he's a Christian rapper. He's a rapper. He's also a Christian. And he had some epic albums that just were real and raw about his stories and his life. And then he went like super viral. I forget the name of the song, but it's got like 100 million hits. And then the next album that he came out with was, I'm successful now. I can't necessarily relate to the material that I came out with a couple of years ago because I'm not there anymore.
Yeah.
So he made the first track of that new album was all about the struggle of what do I say now? And I was like, holy cow, it's brilliant. It's just like sharing exactly what's going on of like, what do I say now? I don't know. It was an epic album.
That's cool. Yeah. Most people aren't doing that. They're trying to talk about how it used to be, or, they're trying to I mean, it seems like some people are, especially in music, they're talking about where they want to be, or they're talking about how it used to be, but they're not necessarily talking about what's going on in the moment. So
yeah,
that's really interesting.
And it's almost like that those artists who create that kind of content, it's like those are the realest people that I know.
Yeah. I mean, that's cool. And it's cool that they're sharing that message. And so that's, I think, what we all have to remember is that somebody out there is inspired by, like, he might have thought, why am I even writing this down? Why am I, putting this on paper and getting my story out there? But it's like, it's clearly connecting with other people like yourself, So you have to know that there's always people out there. There's always at least somebody out there who's going to connect with your story and relate to it and be benefited by it. So
and be talking about it, and you don't even know. We're having this conversation about something that he created, and like he doesn't know who we are.
How powerful is that? I mean, it's amazing.
Maybe we can get his attention.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, we'll throw his handle up here in the episode. Well, so I think that's a great segue into my next question. Through your entrepreneurial journey, what has been the most difficult thing, do you think, about being an entrepreneur?
Dude, starting. This is when I went out on my own. This is kind of a fairly recent revelation that I'm able to answer this question, because when I was working with Scott, I was writing copy. It was getting funded with ads. And so it would get out and it would get feedback. I was sending all these emails out to, a list of 15 to 30,000, whatever it was. I had all these resources that I could use. And then by the time I finished, I was also coaching inside of our mastermind. And so I kind of look at it as I was like coaching Olympians, like people who had put in years of hard work and practice and habits. And when I went out on my own, I was like, they make it look so easy. I can do it, no problem. And I jumped into the swimming pool and I just started drowning because I didn't have the training that they had, the internal emotional endurance that had been built over years. And for like a solid year, I felt like I was just flailing, just trying to find my way forward. And it wasn't until, so I started in June-ish 2019. And so it wasn't until this past summer that I really felt like I learned how to swim. And so I would say like the hardest part of entrepreneurship was that up until this point, I had never really had to work for anything in my life. Like, and I had to face that fact in the past 6 to 8 months of being like, oh, wow, like I've had this kind of exalted image of myself. And I look at it now, I'm like, actually, the truth is that I was born into an incredible home. Like my parents, took care of me. They loved me. I had a loving home environment. They paid for me to go to a private school where I got an amazing education. Like, and then when I got into politics, all of the connections from politics I had because my dad was in politics, was in the industry. And so I had a built-in network. And so like that entire time, like just kind of going through, and then even falling in with Scott, like it wasn't like I was looking for the thing that was next. It just happened. There was an opportunity and I took it. And it was almost like until kind of June, July 2019, like really didn't have to work hard for anything. And that was the hardest part of like facing off with my ego and being like, actually, hard work looks a lot different now than what you thought it looked like 5 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. But that's cool to acknowledge and then figure out how to move past, because, you know, you come to a realization that it's like, well, I could kind of go back into whatever I was doing before, but that's not what
kill my soul.
You're right. Yeah. That's not what you really wanted to do. Although that would have probably been a lot easier.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's really awesome that you were able to face that, acknowledge it, and then say, all right, I'm ready to work, work my ass off.
Yeah.
And just really dig in and work like you've never worked before. So I think that's really cool.
There's this speech from Matthew McConaughey, and he calls it, I think 13 rules for life or something. It's like almost an hour long on YouTube. In fact, I think I only watched half of it, but
that's a long, that keeps popping up on my YouTube too, actually. And I might even have it saved to watch later. Cause I'm like, an hour?
It's a commitment,
I don't know. Yeah, it is a commitment. Yeah.
It's good stuff. Okay. So his first rule for life was, and he's given like a commencement address at a college or something. And he said the first rule was life is hard, and don't fall into the trap of thinking that you're a victim and that you're entitled to something else, because you're not. Like life is just hard. As soon as you can accept that and move forward, then like the better. And like that just hit me in such a special way, because I was exactly the conversation I was having with myself at that time. Of like, oh wow, I think I'm actually super entitled. And like just kind of taking this victim mentality of like, it should be easier than this.
Yeah.
And they say that like 90% of entrepreneurship is mindset, and you can hear that until you're blue in the face. But once you experience that, you're like, oh wow, yeah, that's true. It's like, it's 90% what's up here and 10% like massive action.
Yeah. And what I think we don't see though is seasoned entrepreneurs make it look easy, because they know the struggle's real. They've been there. They've done that to a degree. It might be a different, obstacle that they're facing, but they know at the end of the day, as long as they keep moving forward, man, that things will work out. And as long as they have those positive affirmations, as long as they're actually doing something, because it's more than just positive mindset and having positive affirmations. You have to take action. You have to implement action behind the affirmations, behind your mindset. You just can't say, well, tomorrow I'm going to land this client for $1 million. But what did you do? What did you do leading up to this point that's actually really going to benefit you when you sit down in front of that client? And what really is going to land that person, right? Like, what did you, everything you've done till today, if you haven't practiced, if you haven't, if you don't, you haven't locked in your pitch, if you don't know what the hell you're even going to say, right? Like that's the wrong answer.
It's a lot of pre-work.
Exactly. You're not landing that client tomorrow, bro.
Yeah.
Unless you just fall into it. It's somebody that you know, or somebody that your family knows, and it just falls into your lap. And that does happen. But at the end of the day, man, it like the seasoned entrepreneurs, and I just think the longer I'm an entrepreneur, right, is the more it's like, okay, yeah, this sucks. This roller coaster is going up and down, and it's hard. But man, but I just always find that tomorrow the sun's going to rise, and tomorrow is a new day. Even the next minute's a new opportunity for me to crush it and kill it. So as long as you don't stop, as long as you don't throw in the towel, man, you got to take action. But I mean, I love that it is a mindset change, and it is up here. Most of it is there because you have to have positive thinking for you to even be successful.
Totally. The crazy thing of what you just said is that we often talk about these as if they're two different things, mindset and then taking action, but they feed each other. Exactly. Because if your affirmation is like, I'm going to show up today and I'm going to post a piece of content every single day. And then you get to Friday and you haven't posted at all. Like you've just fed your mindset monster, because now your monster can look at you and say like, oh, you said you're going to post every single day. Well, look at this. You haven't done it.
Right.
And you create an accusation in your own mind of we create these mindset obstacles for ourselves a lot of times by breaking integrity. And as soon as you can recognize that that's what's happening, like, acknowledge, forgive, and renegotiate.
Yeah.
And that is actually the real process of entrepreneurship and growth. How much grace can you have for yourself, and how much can you adjust and renegotiate and shift? How fast can you shift into doing the next thing? It's not about avoiding the fall. It's how fast you can get back up.
Love it.
Definitely. Yeah.
So, I mean, Cam, as we wrap up this episode, brother, because we've been on nearly almost an hour now, if you could leave our listeners with one piece of advice, man, and you might have already touched on it before briefly, what would it be, man?
I think from a holistic business perspective, I truly do think that creating connections and building trust with your audience is the most valuable use of your time as an entrepreneur. And that starts with you, right? Like what we were just talking about with mindset. Is building trust with yourself is the most important thing, because you can't transfer that trust if you don't have it for yourself. And then the second step is, as you've built up that trust and you've built up this credibility with yourself, then you can share your story. And then you can create those connections with your audience, using the story economy to really build rapport and a deeper connection with your audience than just hey, I'm a business person and you're a customer. It's a deeper relationship. I think that whole last section that we just talked about around mindset and taking action, I wish not so much that I'd heard that at the beginning of my career, so much as I'd actually implemented it. And I would say, if I could go back to the beginning and make some adjustments, the first thing that I would have done is I would have worked with Spencer on workflow in getting my tasks figured out and my calendar locked in, because all of that being chaotic and having my ideas and my mind so noisy all the time because of the things that I had to do, it just cost me so much when it could have just fixed that problem, not knowing it was a problem that could be fixed, and freed up all of that energy that was spent spinning my wheels in my head and actually taking it and put it into productive action.
Love it. Couldn't agree more. Yeah, that's great.
Well, guys, I think that's a wrap for this episode. But brother, from the both of us, Cam, we want to thank you for taking the time out of your day and joining us and adding value to what we're doing on our podcast, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Really enjoyed this.
Yeah, man, it was very cool to have you on the show. Thank you all so much for listening to That Entrepreneur Life. To learn more about what Cam is working on, check out CameronSnow.com. If you like what you heard today, please subscribe to our podcast, and don't forget to download our free ebook at thatentrepreneurlife.com. Also, if you're interested in having us do some mini masterclass episodes this year, please let us know by giving us a shout through our website.
Thanks for continuing to support what we do as entrepreneurs, guys. And don't forget to join us next week for another episode of That Entrepreneur Life.
Thanks for listening to That Entrepreneur Life podcast. Be sure to visit thatentrepreneurlife.com to join the conversation, access our show notes, and discover our fantastic bonus content. Don't forget to join us next week for another episode as we continue to add value. Until next time.